Hi, everyone. Welcome back to Transdimensional Realities here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. I'm your host, Milyssa Lee, and we're really excited to do our second show so far of the year. And with this show, as I mentioned previously, we're going to talk about all sorts of subject matters in not exactly the paranormal, but in the way we view the world, our reality, and how there are so many different things going on in reality that a lot of people just don't pay attention to or ignore. So we're going to be exploring that. And we got a great guest tonight, a good friend, Neil Ward. Neil is the co-host of the Paranormal Peep show here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, as well as being an author and researcher. We're going to be discussing his new book entitled Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained, the Most Perplexing Events of Recent Times. So I'm thrilled to introduce my friend, Neil Ward. Hi, Neil. Welcome to the program.
Thank you very much. It's great to be on your new show, and I wish it a great success.
Oh, why, thank you. Thank you.
Cool.
And we've talked many times in the past, and you've always had some really interesting material in your books, and we're here to talk about the newest book, the Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained. So how did you come by writing this book? And let's talk about some of the things that you were able to cover.
Okay, so yeah, good question. The book actually kind of pretty much started straight off as the other one was being put in the final stages of the edit of the last one, which was True Tales of the Unexpected, which came out in November 2024, I think. And so literally 3 weeks after that was released, I suddenly got an email from the publisher and they said, look, we've got a new book that we've lined up called Modern Mysteries. Would you be interested in doing it? Because we think this is your kind of bag, as it were. So
Mm-hmm.
I said, yeah, sure. And they actually gave me four mysteries that they had already pre-decided on because they said that's going to be mentioned somewhere on the book on the back description, which some of the mysteries I was familiar with, some I weren't, so I had to check those out. So they had chosen the Dyatlov Pass incident, something called the Somerton Man, and the Oakville Blobs, and the ME 370 flight, which was the Malaysian flight. I think I've got the number right.
Oh,
Hopefully,
yes.
the one that went missing about
Very
11 years
familiar
ago
with
now.
that. Very familiar
Yeah,
with that.
interesting story, that one.
Well, I'm very familiar with Dyatlov Pass, if I
Yeah.
pronounced it correctly, and what happened there. And I know a lot of people have looked into that. There's been a lot of different theories. Most people seem to think that it was a type of Bigfoot or Yeti that did it. Other people think that maybe in the cold they got delusional and ran out and froze to death. But although there was evidence, I believe, of at least one of the hikers was beaten brutally and had their skull crushed, I believe.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on which way you interpret the evidence, and the thing is, the trouble is because it was taking place in the Soviet Union, and we'll kind of go into the details to explain to people what the Dyatlov Pass is. For I mean, we're talking because we know it, but there's people thinking, what the hell are we talking about? So this was a case that happened in the 1950s. I think it's 1959, and
Mhm.
it concerned something like nine young Russian students that were doing a kind of ski hike exercise to achieve a certain grade of achievement, kind of medals and certificates and things like that. And they were all experienced skiers, and they were going out in January out into the Ural Mountains, which is going to be pretty damn cold out there at that time of year, to be honest. And but they're all experienced skiers. They're led by a young guy who's 23. I might have got his Christian name wrong, but it could be Yuri, but I may be wrong. I know that one of them was called Yuri,
Mhm.
Dyatlov, who was, I think he was studying to be an engineer, but the ski thing was another kind of string to his bow, as it were.
Mhm.
And they all kind of went out there on trains and trucks and things like that, and, like hopping from one location to another, staying overnight at one location, meeting school kids, telling them about their adventures that were to come. And they retrieved a lot of the information from a daily diary that one of the young girls that was part of this party was keeping on a daily basis. And they also took lots of cameras. So there's a lot of evidence that they could look back on to try and work out what may have happened. And so when it came to the kind of third or fourth day in, one of the party had to turn back because he had got injuries from a previous expedition somewhere, and they weren't kind of that was causing him grief basically. So he had to abandon the party and said, "Look, I've got to go back." So because of that decision, it was a fateful decision because he was the only one out of that group that survived by going back. And the group proceeded on for another 10 days or so. And again, the diary was being written on a daily basis. And then they heard no more from them after a certain period of time. They couldn't obviously communicate with radios, or they were meant to kind of send a message by, I think it was telegram in those days. If they got to a certain town, they said, when we get to this town, we'll send you a telegram to their headquarters back at the college, and we'll let you know how we are. Now, the college didn't receive a telegram on the date in question, and they just assumed, well, it must be bad weather. They've been slightly delayed in getting there. But no word was reached for many days. And eventually, they decided to call out a search party. And because of the bad weather, they couldn't find them until at least February. They found some of the party out in this area, which has now been named Dyatlov Pass, named after the leader of this group. And there's actually a great big kind of monument that marks their deaths, and it's got all their pictures on it. And they found them on this kind of mountainside. It was actually called Death Mountain. They believed they was trekking up this mountain, which is known locally as Death Mountain. So you couldn't get a more ominous kind of setting, really. And they found some were face down in the snow by a tree, a cedar tree that had just been frozen. Some of their clothes were missing. They found the tent that they're all staying in completely torn and cut from the inside. When they analysed the tent, they flew off the tent to get forensic analysis on it. And it wasn't till about 3 months later, as the snow began to thaw, that the locals managed to find what they believed could be disturbances in the snow as it melted. And sure enough, when they began digging with the special police and the military that was looking for them, they did find two bodies, or was it four? It might 3 or 4 that had fallen down into this ravine in a river. One of them, they detected radioactive materials on their clothing, which was interesting. And the others, they had like crushed rib cage. Their eyes had been pulled out, tongues had been removed. Yet the things they were buried under like 10 feet of snow at this point. So there's speculation that what caused all those injuries. Was it animals, like scavenger animals, that were eating the corpses? But how could they do that if they're under 10 feet of snow? Maybe they ate the eyes and the tongue before the thing collapsed into the ravine. But it looked like they were trying to build a camp or something, and this thing had just collapsed. But it could be that the snow had fallen on them as well, causing their chest to get crushed and things. But some of them had their whole skin removed off their skull. If you go on the internet, you can find these pictures. They are quite disturbing. So I'd recommend that those are of a nervous disposition, maybe not to venture too closely into that. But it was the fact that the deaths were covered up by the Soviet authorities at the time. And it's only when the Berlin Wall collapsed in 1989 did this story of these 9 missing skiers sort of come to light. And the prosecutor involved in the case, who was a guy that was essentially he was the lead policeman on the case, he was told to keep quiet about a lot of that sort of stuff, and he was pretty sure that it could have been involved with a UFO. He thinks that a lot of them have been shot by what he termed a death ray from a UFO, because their cameras revealed photographs, certainly the last shots revealed strange lights in the sky, which could have been a UFO. Yeah, I mean, they did admit some years later the Soviet military were testing out what they call parachute mines, which are these mines that get launched from aeroplanes or fired from rockets or something. And they come down on a parachute, and they explode near the enemy or something as they're coming down on a parachute. So that could explain potentially the lights that they had photographed. They didn't want to admit that they were maybe dropping these bombs in that area because they shouldn't have been doing it. But obviously, if this group of hikers had gone off course anyway, they were probably in the wrong place at the wrong time. So that was one potential explanation. But then the other explanation is, well, what's causing this radiation on some of the clothes, you see? Now, it did turn out one of the explanations given to kind of explain that was that one of the party did work or had some association with a Russian atomic kind of factory or place where they were dealing with atomic and nuclear stuff. So that might explain some of the radiation. The important thing to note is that a lot of the clothes were that were found on these bodies were not actually their clothes, but they were taken from the other dead bodies. So, as some died of frostbite, they would take their clothes off to keep for themselves, to keep them warm. So, they were really, a lot of them were freezing to death, basically. But when they held the funerals of these people, lots of eyewitnesses said that the color of the skin of the corpses, when they were allowed to view them, didn't look right. They just didn't look like proper corpses. And so again, that raised an anomaly with people about what possibly could have caused that. So and again, you mentioned a Yeti or a Bigfoot. They did sight a kind of creature or some shadowy figure through the trees, which they did take a photograph of, but you can't really discern who it is or what it is exactly. It does look humanoid from a distance of maybe 100 meters away or so. And one of the young girls in her diary had written a kind of a jokey thing to say that we might even encounter the Yeti out here. Who knows, kind of thing, you know. So there's lots of things there to kind of chew over and sort of think, well, what did kill these people, you see?
See, I am unfamiliar with the parts of the story about the bodies found in the ravine missing eyes and tongue, or the switching of clothes, radiation. That's all news to me. Shows you how I should have researched it more. But it's a fascinating case either way, because there's so many different elements from different explanations. I had always just assumed it was a Yeti Bigfoot attack, but now I'm starting to change that opinion. Seems
Yeah.
like there was a lot more going on.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, they did find some bodies that had died, they think, earlier than the others, and the best explanation is that some died, and when they died, they stole their clothes or took them respectfully off them to help them survive.
Mhm.
But the thing is, what caused them to suddenly cut their way out the tent? So one of the other explanations, one of the more mundane explanations, is what they call a slab ice avalanche, where they think that an avalanche of literally slab ice is slid down the mountain toward them. They could probably hear it coming down the mountain towards them before it actually struck the tent, because they found the tent half buried in snow anyway. Um, and so to find their way out quickly, like, can we get the zip open or the buttons undone of our tent or whatever it is that holds it together? And they just took a knife and cut their way out quickly and then
Hmm.
ran out the tent to get out the way of this oncoming slab ice, really. That may have killed a few of them, or they may have buried a few up to their necks in snow. They may have dug their way out. But then some of them seem to have like burn marks on their hands and arms, which could have been caused by campfires. Others seem to have bruises on their face, look like someone had punched them up or something like that. So there was other people that sort of said, well, maybe they've been beaten up by the Russian military or something, you know, keep quiet about whatever we're doing here, and threatened them. Or they may have been killed by the local populace, which is the people that lived out in those areas that herded reindeer. So lots of people came under suspicion. But the guy that was the prosecutor found that his hands were tied to a certain extent because he felt that he couldn't proceed too much digging further into it because it was ruffled a few feathers higher up the chain. And so a lot of it is a mystery simply because people are not willing to divulge the nature of what's happened within the Russian government at that time and what happened out in the mountains. And basically, lots of people lost their jobs for allowing them to go out there. And they forbid people to go into their area for another 3 or 4 years after the event happened. I guess they just wanted to make sure that things weren't going to go, or it gave them time to clear away evidence that they didn't want people to find. Maybe I don't know, but it's a very hard to get to place anyway. People obviously still go there, but only the very determined. You know, those that are
Mhm.
perhaps experienced hikers with people that know the way around there. Um, but it's yeah, a very strange case. I mean, some people speculated it could be UFOs that are doing what they call human mutilations and things. Can't prove it, but it's one sort of like potential possibility, considering that the head guy that was investigating it did think it was UFOs, and certainly there was reports from other people that believed they'd seen UFOs and lights in the sky as well, which may not be those parachute bombs. They could have been genuine UFOs, but who knows? Who knows?
Fascinating case. I mean, I don't think we're ever going to get the full answers for it because it happened so long ago under the Soviet Union. So, but it's a fascinating mystery.
Yeah, it's one of those ones that every few years people seem to like have another crack at it basically. And I know that in about 2018 or 19, they sent a team out there to come up with some various theories. And then more recently, about 2023, 24, another team went out there to try and come up with some theories. And the only explanation they officially came up with that they were killed by some powerful force, but they didn't really explain what that powerful force was, whether it was of nature or of man or of something off-worldly. They didn't really go into detail. So it was a very abstract kind of explanation of what killed them.
There's a something that I've been really interested in studying lately, which may or may not have anything to do with this case, but it's all the stories out of in the US, out of Appalachia. And there's stories where the locals have rules because there's so many incidents of high strangeness, different creatures, Bigfoot especially, but like the big golem-like creature, witches. It's crazy as hell. But some of the things that you're mentioning from this story kind of fit in with this unexplainable high strangeness that's happening in the Appalachian Mountains. People hearing their names being called in the woods. The rules of Appalachia are at night you close your all your window blinds. You don't, so you nothing can look in. You can't look out. If you're outside and you hear your name called, no, you didn't. If you hear whistling, no, you didn't. If you see anything, you turn tail and walk away. Don't run, because that, kicks in a predator response if you run. But
Yes.
there's so many strange stories. And there are places in the world that are just like this. I mean, you have the Bridgewater Triangle up in Massachusetts. You have what's that forest in Romania? The with the big open circle area, and people have had a lot of experiences in that. It's been years since I've talked about that. That's why I can't remember the name of it. Just certain places of high strangeness around the world that it really, twists reality or what we think of as reality.
Mm, yeah. Well, you mentioned Bigfoot there, and obviously we talked about Bigfoot in the Dyatlov Pass incident. Could there be a Yeti or something involved in that one? But one of the other mysteries I cover in the book is the Bigfoot mystery, because the dictate of the book is that I had to cover mysteries from the 20th century to present day. I couldn't go way back into the past and say, well, who built the pyramids? That's a mystery. That
Mhm.
wasn't part of the remit on the book. So, I mean, one of the very first mysteries I picked up on was about a lighthouse where three of the lighthouse keepers in 1901, literally just at the turn of the 20th century, went missing. Possibly caused by a freak wave that pulled them all out to sea. But one of the later mysteries I covered was the Bigfoot, and that began around in the 1950s. But people had already heard of something similar because when people started to go up Mount Everest and in the Himalayas, there was talk of seeing strange, large, ape-like hairy creatures up there. They certainly found footprints in the snow, and
Hmm.
they even measured them with their pickaxes to kind of get a rough gauge of how big these footprints were. And usually when these mountaineers were up the mountains, they could look down into the valley and they could see these figures. They'd stand out a mile, these great big dark figures against the snow. And it was believed that these creatures, the Yeti or the Bigfoot, were walking from one mountain range to another to find food, sourcing food in the valley or something. And the name of the abominable snowman became known about around that time. That was actually a mistranslation from the Nepalese people. So because they smell rather like Bigfoot in the US and Canada, they got this skunk ape kind of description of smelling.
Hmm.
I think the same applies to all these Bigfoot creatures around the world. And what they were trying to describe was the bad smelling creature man, hairy man. But the
Hmm.
translation came out wrong, and the guy who translated it can only come up with the word abominable snowman because he couldn't come up with smelly old hairy man or something, whichever this translation might become to. So I guess he made it more palatable for the Western ears or something, but he called it the abominable snowman. And it was a strange thing. Why was it called abominable? But I think that kind of explains it really. But it was later on when loggers were kind of like making roads in various forests in the US and Canada that they discovered lots of their equipment went missing or was messed around with, and then they started to find footprints. And what was happening as people were becoming more industrialized, they're digging their way into these forests. So that's where these creatures are allegedly living.
Hmm.
And so they're kind of defending their territory or trying to warn them off or something, or just curious. And that's when they're finding evidence of them. And so the mystery of the Bigfoot really started from there. And that's when people that had actually gone into the forest years before as single gold prospectors, who had encounters, they would read about these articles in these magazines some 30 or 40 years later and said, well, I've seen these things, but 30 or 40 years ago, in
Right.
1915 or 1920, Albert Ostman being a case point of that's what brought him forward because he saw a magazine article about the Bigfoot. And so he stepped forward and says, well, I've seen one too, but it was in 1926. And that's where he encountered a family of Bigfoot and he stayed with them for like 6 days. Not voluntary, I would add. He was kept prisoner. And he managed to escape after he managed to persuade the old man Bigfoot to try some of his snuff. And once he was distracted by the powerful smell of snuff up his nostrils, that's when he grabbed his gun and ran the hell out of there, he said.
Well, that's a very famous case. I remember reading about that many years ago. And the same year, there was the other case up around Mount St. Helens in an area what would later be called Ape Canyon, where these miners were working and they had a little cabin. And one day, one of them saw what was probably a Bigfoot type creature and they shot it and the creature fell into the canyon dead. And that's how it got the name Ape Canyon. But then that night, they were attacked all night long by several of these creatures trying to break in to get at them in this cabin. They were bounding at the door, which they barricaded. They were trying to come through the roof. They were kept shooting at them. It was a really hairy, pardon the pun, experience. And the next morning, they finally were able to get out of there. The creatures retreated, but there's all these big boulders and rocks all around the cabin, and they got
Wow.
out of there. So, but yeah, that happened the same year as Albert Ostman's experience.
It's interesting that you mentioned Mount St. Helens because they believe that when Mount St. Helens, the volcano that was there, went off in 1980, I think it was, with a massive, ferocious eruption, they believe that a lot of the possible Sasquatches maybe had to move out of the area because of that. And so
Mhm.
they ended up taking up new territories and more sightings increased because of that. And possibly some were killed in the lava flow, perhaps, if they didn't get away or died of ash inhalation, maybe, or
Hmm.
something. So yeah, with the Bigfoot chapter, I also cover the story of a guy that actually claimed, similar to your log cabin story, claimed to have shot one, but he didn't want to admit to shooting it because someone like a lawyer pointed out to him, saying, "Look, if we manage to identify this creature and they prove that it's at least half human, because you've shot it, you could be had up for murder and your name's on the block sort of thing." So he would kind of allude to it being shot, but he would not admit to actually shooting it. So he came up with a whole kind of varied stories. Oh, it was found in Japan, or it was brought across by the Russians on an old boat or something like that. And then eventually he did say that he shot it, and it was known as a Minnesota Iceman. And it was
Hmm.
this guy who was out hunting with his friends looking for deer to shoot, and he came across, I think it was three Bigfoot that were possibly, they might have actually been eating his kill that he had shot. And he went up to them, and then one of them leapt up in the air towards him or something, and so he just shot, I presume, instinctively for defense, and the others, they must have run off because he doesn't really mention them. But he shot it and he was shocked. He didn't know what to do with it, so he left it. And it was about 5 or 6 days later, he decided that it preyed on his mind too much. He's got to go back there and find this creature. And he found it there, buried in the snow by this point. And he put it in his pickup truck and he brought it back to his wife and says, "Oh, by the way, we need the freezer now for this thing. So get your peas and beef out. We're going to put this thing in the freezer." And they got this great big chest freezer or something. They put it down in this freezer. And basically, they toured this around the United States at carnivals, fairs, shopping malls as the Minnesota Iceman, charging people, 50 cents or whatever at that time to go in there between 1967 to about 1978 or something like that. And Frank Hansen, I think, was the guy that did this. Now, there was some people, he called in some experts to come and kind of give it some authority. What was the kind of science and the biology of this creature that he had found? And these two guys that were top biologists of the day, one was Belgium, I can't remember their names now, and one was English, I think. They were invited to go in during the winter months when this thing wasn't on tour, and they spent 3 days examining this corpse of this Bigfoot, for want of a better word, this hairy creature that had been shot. And they said it was buried under this ice with a glass cover. And at first they thought it was fake. They was very suspicious. But they said, let me tell you, after 3 days of examining this thing close up, we came to the conclusion this was once a real living, breathing creature. And they said one of its eyes was missing and the other eye had popped out and was hanging sort of down on its cheek. They said that's possibly because of the force of the other eye popping out may have popped the other one out. Its hand was up like that. Now you think, oh, that's because it's trying to stop itself getting shot. But if you actually think about it, this creature has never encountered a man before, likely, never understood what a gun was. So it wouldn't even understand that a bullet is coming out towards it at twice the speed of sound. So there's no way that it would even want to put its hand up instinctively. It may have put its hand up instinctively as it fell forward, perhaps to stop the fall. That's my explanation anyway. But its hand is found frozen in that position just above its head. And they reckoned it was a young male, possibly about 12, 13 years of age, but it was at least 6 foot something. But it was a hairy person. And you could see where the blood had oozed out of it, and it all kind of bubbled in the water that had now become ice. And they basically gave it the thumbs up and said this is definitely a real creature. And they wrote a book about it. And sometime after that, the Minnesota Iceman disappeared off the tour circuit thing. And it was supposedly replaced by some sort of dummy that was there instead. Now, I looked at photographs on the internet of this creature, and it didn't have the ice on or the glass on. So I suspected the pictures I was looking at was the dummy because this looked kind of, there's no ice there or blood or anything like that.
I have seen the pictures of it
Yeah,
encased in ice.
and I've seen some of the encased in ice pictures, yes.
Hmm.
So you can kind of sense that what they've got in ice was real because he also, the guy that was studying it, he said as they leant across the glass to study it, their weight cracked the glass below them. and there was a breakage, and then they could start to smell the smell of rotting flesh coming up
Mm.
through this cracked ice, which to them said that's definitely something real in this box, you know. So yeah, it was definitely given the seal of approval, as it were, by these two biologists, zoologists. But of course, if you go to Wikipedia, it's a different kettle of fish you're going to be presented with.
Yeah, that's the problem. Don't go to Wikipedia.
No, don't go to that at all.
Well, there's another story similar to that. I don't know if you, over there, if you remember Art Bell, Coast to
Yeah,
Coast
yeah.
AM. Okay. When he was still doing Coast to Coast many years ago, he had a he got a fax from a guy who claimed to have killed two Bigfoots.
Oh,
And
wow.
he was very paranoid about coming out. He didn't want to be found out for the exact reason of he didn't know if these things were human or not, and he was afraid of getting charged with murder. But then he eventually came forward on the air and told his story. I think he went by the name of Buzz, but he and a buddy were out hunting, and they came across one of the creatures, a big male, and they shot it. And it struggled, it fell back into the bushes or whatnot. And Buzz, I guess, was brave enough to go back in and look for it. And it was dead, but then all of a sudden a female attacked them and they wound up shooting it too. So
Wow.
it killed both of them. And then when they realized, they took a good look at what these creatures were, they started panicking. It's like, I think we murdered someone. And so they wound up burying the two corpses and then vowing never to speak of it again. So it took him about 30 years later to come out on Art Bell's show. And when you listen to this gentleman speak, he sounds very sincere, sounds very scared,
Mm.
paranoid of being found out who he is because he doesn't want to go to jail. Um, and he came on a couple of times, but it was a really interesting and very believable story. Now, I feel bad that they had to kill two Bigfoot just because they didn't know what they were. But yeah, that's just another story of human encounters with Bigfoot that didn't turn out so well.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, given the number of sightings of Bigfoot over the years, um, it doesn't surprise me that there are people that have come across them and killed them. And you think, well, surely we should be hearing about this, but you're hearing bits of it. People are very reluctant to tell you about it, they've done it, you know, because of this thing of getting into trouble. Um, and, you know, it would be amazing if they could bring one forward, but I think in today's world, it'd be a very hot potato to deal with. And this is possibly why they don't want to admit to it because it throws up all these questions about our evolution. Where did we come from? Were we created by God as Adam and Eve, or did we come from apes, or is there some other genetic connection there that we don't want to explain? You know, and that could lead into the whole alien thing where our DNA's allegedly being tampered with, and maybe we've been mixed with Neanderthal man, and that's what the Bigfoot is, etc., etc. And it opens up a whole kind of keg of problems for people, I think.
Well, there are also stories, two different types of stories. Some people who have seen Bigfoot or these creatures receive men in black visits
Ah,
to shut up and don't tell their stories.
yeah.
Um, but there are also a lot of stories surrounding these creatures that go beyond our version of reality. They seem to be able to appear and disappear at will. Footsteps that go or down a path and then just stop. They're no
Mm,
longer there. People see one and then all of a sudden it's gone, peeking out from behind a tree. Some researchers who've caught some on thermal, you'll see a head and shoulders and an arm peeking up from behind a tree. It goes back behind the tree and they walk up to it and there's nothing there.
mm,
So
mm.
there's a lot of, there's also stories of Bigfoots being seen with UFOs and
Yeah.
things like that. But yeah, there's a very interdimensional quality that seems to be surrounding these creatures, at least from a lot of the stories that people have told.
Yes, that's right. It seems there's lots of people that are into the zoology sort of stuff, the cryptozoology. They won't entertain the idea of Bigfoot coming out of a UFO or anything like that. Whereas I'm open to the whole idea if they come out of UFOs. I mean, it could be that there could be two types. There's the natural ones that we have on our Earth, and
Mhm.
then one that could be domesticated that are then put to use by ET or whoever. There was an encounter. I never mentioned this in the book, but I've done this in a presentation. There was an encounter by an Italian guy that was traveling late at night through the mountains of Italy. He was on his way to stay at his aunt's house, who owned a hotel, I think, and he was on his way to her. But because of the snowy weather, he had to pull over and just, wait it out during the night. But he saw this glowing disc craft down in the valley, so he walked down towards to take a closer look. And a robot type creature was outside the craft, and then down this shaft of light or a lift or something appeared a alien with cat-like eyes, and he started to speak to him. And he spoke to him about many, many things. But one of the things he mentioned was that on their planet, or wherever he came from, they have ape-like creatures that do their menial tasks for them. And I thought that was interesting because that might explain a lot about these Bigfoot that come out of these craft. It's almost like you get, if you think back to the film The Day the Earth Stood Still, you got the 9 foot tall Gore, I think his name is, robot that
Mhm.
aids Michael Rennie. He could be a sort of, the Bigfoot could be a more gorilla type version of that as an aid for the aliens in some way. But yeah, it's an interesting connection. But whether we get to the bottom of it, I don't know.
Well, there's one incident that was recorded by the NIDS team, National Institute for Discovery Science, who spent 20 something years investigating the Skinwalker Ranch in Utah. And there was a book that one of the researchers wrote with George Knapp, who's an investigative journalist. And there was one night, two investigators from the team were out using night vision out near one of the old homesteads that were there, Homestead 2. And they started to see only through the night vision, not in with their eyes, a light form near the ground and then started getting bigger and bigger and formed like a ring. And then this Bigfoot type creature crawled through it like it was crawling out of a tunnel, came out, stood up, and ran into the woods.
Wow.
And then that tunnel or portal, whatever it was, shrank back down and then disappeared. The only bad thing about that whole thing is they didn't have any video on it. They didn't that
Mm.
camera's technology back then did not have recording capabilities like the newer ones do now. So it's just a story. But it's interesting. And that's another reason why I love Skinwalker Ranch, like some of these other places that seem to be a mecca of high strangeness.
Yeah, I think the thing is, even if you got footage of that kind of thing happening today, the accusation would be thrown out, well, that's just, CGI,
AI,
AI, or something
AI.
like that,
Mhm.
you know. And that's the problems people face. They're going to get, you can give the best evidence, and it's always going to be shot down. That's been created somehow on a computer. There must be a way of identifying what's AI and what's real through some
There
sort of
is
code or something.
actually, you could run any photos or video through AI, like ChatGPT or others,
Yeah.
and ask it to look for markers that it was created by AI. I had a photo that somebody sent me once that looked suspiciously like CGI or an AI creation. And I ran it through ChatGPT and it did all these checks, and he came back and said everything that it could see, it was genuine.
Wow. That's interesting.
So there are ways to get around it, but I also warn people who are on social media, whether it's TikTok, YouTube, any of these channels where these people share footage of supposed Bigfoots. There's a lot of AI creations out there now, and you can't take anything at face value.
Yeah, I mean that reminds me. I talk a lot about in on the Bigfoot chapter about the Patty film, the so-called Patty film that was filmed
Hmm.
in Bluff Creek in Northern California by Roger Patterson and Bob Gimlin,
Bob
who
Gimlin,
were
yes.
two cowboys, although they were kind of not official cowboys. I guess I don't know really what the term would be, but they were riding horses. They look like cowboys to me anyway. But they had spent about 3 or 4 days, I think, going through this part of the area because they'd heard there's footprints of Bigfoot in the area.
Hmm.
And it is known that Roger Patterson was trying to make a documentary about Bigfoot. He had an interest in it and he persuaded Bob Gimlin to accompany him. And they'd just come round the creek of this small river where they suddenly, I think he said the horses detected it first. They must have smelt it or something, and they got a bit itchy and the horse started to rear up. And I think
Hmm.
Bob Gimlin fell off his horse. And that's the point he said when he got off the horse or fell off the horse and he recovered, he saw the Bigfoot stand up and start to walk away from them. So he shouted over to did I say Bob Gimlin? Patterson got
Patterson,
off or
yeah.
something. Yeah. He shouted across to Bob Gimlin, cover me, because he had a rifle. And so
Hmm.
he was looking at it through his rifle and he said he didn't want to shoot the thing, but he was covering him just in case. And he said that he managed to film, Roger Patterson, he managed to film on this, I think it was a 16 millimeter camera that he had hired, about 2 or 3 minutes of this Bigfoot walking across. And that has become one of the big favorites of Bigfoot fans around the world. And in this modern day and age now, they've had people analyze it and freeze the frame and enhance and everything like that. And they've had people that were experts in anthropology. Jeff Meldrum, I think his name
Dr.
is.
Jeff Muldrum, yeah, he just
Yeah.
passed away a couple
He
months
passed
ago.
away a few months ago, didn't he? Yeah.
Yeah.
But he was a big fan of it. He had come out and said, if you just study the muscles on the back of this creature and its calf muscles and things like that, you can see these muscles ripple. And he said, now with the aid of this technology, you can see it a lot clearer. And, you can see the way the feet walk and everything. And, you get the skeptics saying, oh, you can see the zipper. But where is the zipper? There's no zipper on this thing. You
There's no
point it
zipper.
out, there's no zipper. And they've even had a guy that claimed that he was the Bigfoot from the 1967 film. And he's been filmed walking in a kind of Bigfoot costume, but he looks nothing like this Patty at all.
Yeah, all
But
the costumes they've tried to use to debunk it are look fake as hell. They're obviously
yes,
costumes. And
yeah,
who would come up with the idea of making this creature a female
yes,
with breasts?
yes,
I
yeah.
mean, anybody who was going to try to make a Bigfoot movie, especially back then, put a guy in a suit and just a regular gorilla suit or whatnot and walk across. I mean, we are talking 1967 here or 68.
67, yeah.
Yeah. So the technology didn't exist back then, but to put that extra detail into the video, you can't tell me that was fake. Plus, I agree. I've seen the video examined by multiple anthropologists. They talk about the muscles under the fur, how the arms are longer down by the knees, and the gait and the way it walked. I mean, I totally believe it's real.
Yes, yeah, me too. I kind of agree with Dr. Jeff Meldrum based upon his expertise. That leads me to think that it's definitely a real creature. And the other thing about it is that he makes a comparison with the Planet of the Apes films that were coming out around that time, the original Planet of the Apes films with the latex facial masks or appliances they put on their faces. And he particularly points out in an interview that I've seen with him, he says, if you go to the sequel film, which is like 1969, 1970, beneath the Planet of the Apes, they actually have a shot of these gorillas in a kind of sauna, taking a sauna thing. And he said these things just look like great big furry kind of fur coats sitting on them. It says they look like big furry Pillsbury Doughboys.
Mhm.
They're terrible costumes, he said. They look really awful. And he said, but that was the best they had at the time. And there was also a guy that was he was employed by Hollywood, and I think he might have been from Czechoslovakia, and I forget the guy's name, but he was always the guy that dressed up as the ape or the monster in lots of horror films of the 50s and the 60s.
Hmm.
And he had the best effects applied to him. And even he said, I think it's a genuine Bigfoot. And yet he would know the top effects of the day and what they're capable of. And the guy who did the effects for the Planet of the Apes, the makeup effects, was John Chambers, who he actually received an Oscar for his special effects on Planet of the Apes. And when he was in a retirement home, after he had not worked for many years, someone had got into the retirement home, like a investigative reporter or someone like that, but they dressed up as a nurse to make out they were part of the retirement home to get his trust, I think. And then they would talk to him and they said to him, so what do you think about that Bigfoot filmed in, Northern California? And he said, well, he says, I'm good, but I'm not that good. Meaning he's not as good as whoever did the effects, if there were effects of this makeup on this patty creature. And so that kind of is a strong statement to make. You've got the top guy who did all the artistry on the Planet of the Apes, and he's claiming that he can't be as good as the one that's been seen on this cine film, which was amazing, really. So there's been people that, like you say, there's many people that are trying to emulate it and they try and copy it using their footage. And there's very few that come even close to it. It was just one of those things that they managed to be there on the day and get some really, really strong footage of it. It's amazing. And they even made casts of the footprints because the footprints it created, they managed to get casts of those later on as well, you see. So there's that secondary evidence they brought forward as well.
Well, we have enough time for one more story. What's something else from the book that you find personally very fascinating?
I've always been fascinated with well, there's two I can talk about, but you can choose. I can talk about the ghost of the person writing through time. I've mentioned this to you before, writing through time from the Middle Ages through an early computer. They were
Hmm.
receiving messages. It's called the Doddleston messages. And this guy moved into a cottage. He had borrowed an early BBC microcomputer from 1984, I think, and he started to receive strange messages written in what they call early modern English. And they appear to be messages from a guy talking through time who used to live in the house some 400 years earlier or
Hmm.
something, which was an interesting one. So he was a teacher, this guy called Ken Webster, and he lived in there with his girlfriend who was Debbie, and she was 19 at the time, and I think Ken was probably about 30 or something. And because he was a teacher, they were just at that time bringing out the early BBC microcomputer, which had no internet connection. The internet was about 12 years away from being public, as it were. It had no modem, of course. It was literally a word processor.
Right.
And Ken had borrowed this computer from the school to practice on it so that he could then teach those skills to his students. And there was also a third person that lived in his house for a short while who was writing comedy scripts. And he said, well, why don't you practice on this computer? And he showed her how to do it. And you have to save it to this floppy disk, and and so that's what she did. But sometimes they'd go off to the pub and they'd come back and they'd find messages on there, and it'd be written in Old English. So it's hard to even to understand. Where in the book that I've read called The Vertical Plane, they print some of the messages as they were, and then they've got a sort of translation of how it would sound in today's English.
Mhm.
So it says, for instance, does thee have a horse? And he has to write back, says, no, we have horses, but we don't use them like you do. We have cars. And he has to try and describe what a car is to this guy.
Mhm.
And at first, he thought someone was playing a prank on him. He kept thinking, well, is it my girlfriend? And they'd leave the computer on. They go to the pub. They come back. They find a message on there. And he would talk about his time in Oxford and things like that. And he called himself Lucas, this mysterious writer who was coming through their computer. But the weird thing was, he said he could also see them. And he said, what are you doing in my house? So it appeared to be a case of a poltergeist type of activity, because they'd find things like all the chairs stacked up in the corner of the kitchen, or they'd got a cat and all the tins of cat food were piled one on top of each other very neatly on the kitchen table. Um, but he would talk about things they didn't know about the house. For instance, he would mention red flagstone flooring. And because Ken was trying to renovate the cottage, it was only sometime later that he found traces of this red flagstone flooring underneath the floorboards and things. So, but he was observing them from his time. He could see them like ghosts in his house, and he was frightened of them, thinking they were demons or devils or something like that. But eventually, he began to trust them. So they said, "Well, how can you write to us? What are you using to talk to us from your time?" And he said that there was this person that came down his chimney in a blaze of green light, who he termed as a friend, and he gave me the Leams Boist, which is a modern English word that he gave, an early modern English word, the Leams Boist. Now, the Leams Boist, someone translated it, and they said Boist is box and Leams is colourful lights. So basically, he was talking about a box of colourful lights that he was using to speak through to send messages to the future of 1984. Fascinating story. Fascinating story.
Huh. I mean that gets my brain twirling in all sorts of different directions. A being of light or light comes down the chimney. A being gives them basically a computer
Yeah,
to
yeah,
write things, and it bridges through time. Now, time itself is a very, quote Doctor Who, wibbly wobbly, timey wimey type of thing. Um, and there is the idea that all time is happening at once. So instead of linearly looking all the way back hundreds of years for this communication to take place, it's happening right now, right in real time. And that device was able to bridge the gap between those two timelines that we are only able to see and experience one at a time.
yes, yeah. So the interesting thing is that he didn't have a keyboard on it from how we would understand a keyboard to type things. They said, "Well, how do you write the words?" And he said, "Well, I discovered the words would appear in front of me like in the air." And he had a housemaid that used to do his errands for him. She was like 14. And so she used to clean and cook and stuff like that. And she would sing, and she would sing little songs, apparently. And he would see these words appear in the air above this Leams Boist. So he took that as his way that he could maybe send messages. So he would speak and he would see them. But he said it was interesting that other people couldn't see this box. It was only he could see it. So it's almost like he had to be the medium to make this thing work. Or it gets a bit complicated because other people start to use it. So I'm not quite sure how they can see it too. But he had to be near it or something to make it work. But eventually, he had to move away. And I think I'm not quite sure what happened to the Leans Boys. I can't remember whether someone took it or whatever. But he wrote a book on his experiences in 1380 or whatever the year was that he wrote this book. And he said it would be found somewhere at some point. Now, they haven't found this book today, but there was an angle on this story, as well as Ken Webster communicating with this being called Lucas, whose real name was Thomas. He used Lucas as an alias because he was worried about witchcraft accusations, getting into trouble, that type of thing, a bit like our caller about the Bigfoot type of thing.
Right.
He would use an alias, but he said there was another person in on this conversation who was from the year 2109. And so when he was originally talking to Ken Webster, who was in 1984, he said, "Oh, I am sorry, I apologize. I thought you was the person from 2109." And he said, "Who's this?" And he said, "Well, that's another person that talks to me from the year 2109. So Ken Webster scratched his head and thought, well, this is getting really peculiar. So eventually he decided that he'll try and type a message to this 2109. So he wrote, "Call in 2109." And maybe an hour later, a message pops up on the computer and it's from this 2109. And it said, "It's conducting experiments with time. And there's many of us. We can't tell you too much because it would interfere with the experiment, but we'll try and answer your questions as best as we can." And but it looked like some of the messages that were coming from Lucas were being hacked by this 2109 because some of the people had raised concerns. They said, well, look, there's a question mark that Lucas has written here. You didn't have question marks back in that time, so he can't be using them. But what they believed is that 2109, whoever was in 21, was adding, they were like correcting the typos as such, you see, to try and improve the English. It was a very bizarre case, very bizarre. And they even had people from the psychic investigations of the SPR, the Society of Psychical Research, two researchers go there and try and work out what was happening. And they could not fathom it at all. They had no explanation of what was happening.
Wow. That is probably one of the most bizarre and unique cases I've ever heard of.
It's worth, if anyone wants, I mean, they can read it in the book that I've got, Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained by Neil Ward. But if you want to deep dive into it and look at the actual writing and the text and things, I would recommend buying The Vertical Plane by Ken Webster of Amazon. Now, there are copies out there that are like £200. I would steer away from those. There's a more revised, updated edition, and I would go for that one, which in UK money is about £17. That might be about $25 or something in your money, maybe. So I would go for the more type in revised edition of The Vertical Plane if you want to try and crack down on that one.
Fascinating. Okay, I'm going to look into that, definitely. So we were coming to the end of the show here. Now, where can people find your book?
So, as I mentioned, Amazon is probably one of the most well-known places. So it's True Tales, sorry, not True Tales of the Paranormal. That's our previous book. So this is Modern Mysteries of the Unexplained, and they can find it on Amazon. It's published by Arcturus Publishing, but I guess you can buy it on all the other websites like Barnes and Noble or your local bookstore, anywhere like that. But yeah, go check it out, and please leave a review if anyone does buy it. I'd be glad to have a review of it.
And also, I want to tell everybody, remind them that you are the co-host of the Paranormal Peep Show, which the latest episode is coming out as we're recording this tomorrow, Thursday, the 18th. Ironically, my show will be coming out at the same time too. So push everybody to your show. It's always a great one, and everyone loves it. So, but again, Neil, thank you so much for coming on and talking with me today. This has been a treat.
Thank you very much. And may I take this opportunity to wish you and all your family and friends a great Christmas holiday. And to all the listeners on the Paranormal UK Radio Network, also enjoy yourselves and stay safe. Thanks for listening.
Well, that was certainly an interesting interview with Neil. Neil's a good friend. I've known him a long time. And his show, Paranormal Peep Show, is airing the third Thursday of every month here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. So until next time, just FYI, we will not be having a show next week because of Christmas, but I am going to have a show ready for New Year's. And so once everybody wakes up and starts getting over their hangovers, they have a new transdimensional reality show to watch, which is going to be a show solely dedicated to ghosts and ghost investigations. So until then, thank you for watching and listening here on the Paranormal UK Radio Network. Be good humans, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.